Welcome back, everyone. It's extremely disturbing to acknowledge that there are absolutely authoritative sources that demand perpetual hatred and violence against others. But that's exactly what we have in the Islamic sources against Jews. Before we get to that, however, I have to address the word anti-Semitism because of predictable responses to this video's title. Arabs are Semitic people too, so anti-Semitism cannot be used just to refer to Jew hatred. People who use that argument miss a very simple fact. Word meaning is determined by usage. It's that simple. So let's apply that principle to this statement. Please pause this video and write down the etymology of every single word in the sentence. Tell me what root each word derives from and in what language. Tell me how the word came into English and evolved into modern usage. You can't. You know what every single word means in this sentence, but you don't know the etymology of every single word, if any of them. Word meanings are determined by usage, and you know how these words are used, so you know what they mean. The English word nice comes from a Latin root meaning ignorant. When you use the word nice, do you use the etymological definition or the definition assigned by modern speakers of the language? Well, the answer is obvious. Word meanings are determined by usage. When it comes to the word anti-Semitism, Wilhelm Marr was very influential in the 19th century. He used the non-religious designation Semites to refer specifically to Jews. He and his followers were anti-Jew, they were anti-Semites. The Nazis likewise clarified that their anti-Semitic propaganda was directed specifically at the Jews. Muslim Arabs like Muhammad Amin al-Husseini understood this and wanted to work with the Nazis to accomplish the final solution to the Jewish question. Anti-Semitism, therefore, is used specifically to signify prejudice against Jews, regardless of the word's etymology. Sometimes this objection is raised out of simple ignorance. Other times, it's an off-the-cuff response from senseless anti-Semites who aren't attempting a good-faith conversation in the first place. So, answer a fool according to his folly. Now to our main issue. Anti-Semitism in the Islamic sources is vast and requires us to acknowledge that Islamic texts inspire many in the Muslim world with a perpetual and sometimes violent hatred of the Jewish people. Here is some help as we try to grasp the scope and seriousness of this problem.
احنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة. المصريين لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة لأنه احنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
يابا طب أنا قاعد أكلمك من جوبا بسيم. افتح الواتس تبعه قول له وين شوف كيف القتلة، شوف كيف قتلك فيديو يابا، ابنك قتل يهود، هاي دخلوا فلسطين يابا.
الله اكبر، ربنا يحميك يا رب، ربنا يحميك يابا، ربنا يحميك يابا.
بكلمك من جوال يهودية قتلتها وقتلت جوزها.
الله اكبر، الله اكبر ولله الحمد. الله اكبر ولله الحمد.
يابا افتح الواتس شوف كيف قتلت يابا. افتح بتصل عليك واتس قول له وين بروح.
ربنا يوفقك بالسلامة.
يابا جوا بسيم يابا والله 10 قتلت 10 بيدي يابا على ايدي اعطيني امي
يما يسميك يما طول الليل
10 بيدي يابا 10 يلا بيدي قتلت والله صرت بكاري انا اول سخره بدات تصدق الله عز وجل. انا اقول صبي ارفع راسك يابا فوق ارفع راسك يابا
انت خلصت سكرت.
Ultimately, the source of this hatred is the Quran, but don't take my word for it. To start, in 1968, a number of Muslim scholars met in Cairo for the 4th conference of the Academy of Islamic Research. One of the speakers was Professor Abdul Sattar El-Sayed, a Muslim scholar from Syria. And he said, "We are fortunate enough to have an available document that tells the truth about the Jews and reveals their nature, life, and the inherent poison they carry, as well as the remedy for such poison. This document is represented in the Holy Quran, which provides the real description of the Jews and constitutes the microscope through which we can see the pests and poisons that reside in their minds and hearts." Notice it's the poison in the hearts and minds of other people. That's the problem, you see. So let's start with the Quran, the ultimate and most authoritative source of Islamic anti-Semitism. There are so many verses, I cannot possibly begin to address them all, so we have to focus just on a couple. Surah 564 says, "The Jews say, the hand of God is chained. May their hands be chained, and may they be cursed for what they say. No, both his hands are outstretched. He gives as he pleases. What has been sent down to you from your Lord will indeed increase many of them in insolent transgression, and disbelief. We have cast hostility and hatred among them until the day of resurrection. Whenever they light the fire of war, God extinguishes it. But they strive at fomenting corruption on the earth, and God does not love the fomenters of corruption. And for a bit more context from the same chapter, still talking about the same hostility. Verse 82 reads, "Certainly you will find that the strongest people in hostility to the believers," referring to the Muslims, "are the Jews and the idolaters." I selected these verses because for many they just seem so mild. Lots of readers, particularly those with a secular worldview, will have difficulty understanding the significance of what these verses are saying. So let's comment briefly as we focus on these two verses. For Muslims, the Quran is the word-for-word divine revelation of Allah. It constitutes certain knowledge. When the Quran says, "We have cast hostility and hatred among them until the day of resurrection," that means necessarily that there is nothing but hatred among the Jews forever in this life. All Muslims must believe this. But the hostility isn't contained to the Jewish people. It's not just among them. Notice they strive at fomenting corruption on the earth. Obviously, Allah's observation about the Jews is larger than just their community. It's worldwide. Verse 82 clarifies that the Jews are even stronger in hostility toward Muslims than idolaters. To communicate the harshness of the language, Professor Droge's translation reads, "Certainly you will find that the most violent of people in enmity to the believers are the Jews." Again, Muslims have to believe this. It is the word of Allah. For the duration of this earthly life until the day of resurrection, Muslims will not find enemies worse than the Jews, according to their God. Let's look at a few Muslim commentaries to further understand the significance of these verses. Ibn Kathir makes broad use of much later Islamic tradition influenced by anti-Semitism and Jewish mysticism in his commentary on Surah 582. He says, "This describes the Jews, since their disbelief is that of rebellion, defiance, opposing, blah, 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 blah. This is why the Jews, may Allah's continued curses descend on them until the day of resurrection, killed many of their prophets and tried to kill the messenger of Allah several times, as well as performing magic spells against him and poisoning him. Some of you will recall authentic Muslim sources that describe Muhammad being powerless before the Jews and their bewitching hairbrushes." Sayyid Qutb comments, "This wicked and most vile nature could only be defeated in past history by Islam and its followers when they truly followed Islamic principles. Our modern world will not be saved from this wicked nature except by Islam, and only when its people implement Islam completely in their lives." Muslims must believe that Allah has increased hostility among the Jews, who foment corruption on the earth and are the harshest of people against the Muslims. Obviously and ironically, this makes Muslims the harshest of people against the Jews. And as the Quran says, this is the reality until the day of resurrection. If you believe the Quran is the word of Allah, this is what you have to believe about the Jews, and you will find reasons to prove Allah's words true. Muslim scholar and Palestinian activist Salah Abd al-Fattah al-Khalidi provides more commentary on one of our verses from Surah 5. He says that verse 64 could serve as the title for the Jews' entire history, for it implies their corruption in all its aspects and facets. God, referring to the words of the Quran, is correct. Most of the wars in this world were planned out by the Jews, started by the Jews, and ignited by the Jews in order to spread their corruption in the earth. Jews ignite the spark of war, and the igniter does not get burned. He only provides the fuel. God is correct. The Jews do not lose any victims in these wars. The only victims come from naive people, and the fuel consists of them, their resources, wealth, and existence. The Hamas Covenant of 1988 also cites Surah 564 and sounds very similar. You may speak as much as you want about regional and world wars. They were behind World War I when they were able to destroy the Islamic Caliphate, making financial gains and controlling resources. They obtained the Balfour Declaration, formed the League of Nations, through which they could rule the world. This is so stupid. It's like every anti-Semitic conspiracy theory all in one paragraph, except for maybe the Jewish space lasers. Yeah, I don't think that's in here. They were behind World War II, through which they, okay, whatever, skip to the last sentence. There is no war going on anywhere without having their finger in it. Okay, there you have it, and then Surah 564 is quoted. And moving into very recent events, Surah 582 was cited to advocate for the extermination of all Jews. Saleh al-Raqab, a professor of religion at Gaza's Islamic University, I'm sure that's not complete trash, and a former minister of religious affairs and endowments in the Hamas government, published an article on October 8th, the day after the brutal assault in which 1,400 Israelis were killed, titled, O Mujahideen in Palestine. He says, O Allah, grant victory to the fighters in Palestine, guide their strikes to the throats of Jews, make their legs steady, and let them stab a knife through the hearts of the Jews. Enable them to kill the soldiers of the Jews, destroy weapons, capture Jews. O Allah, destroy the Jews completely, paralyze their limbs, and freeze the blood in their veins. The Palestinian Scholars Association in the diaspora published a fatwa on October 21st, permitting jihad against the Zionists as one of the main obligations of our religion, with the stated goal being to free the Al-Aqsa Mosque and rebel Zionists from the Islamic country of Palestine. The fatwa quotes a Quranic verse that says, and here it is, "You will find that the most bitter enemies of Muslims are the Jews and the polytheists." There are numerous other verses in the Quran that we could refer to, but for now we have to move on to a very influential hadith reported in two of the most trusted collections. You know it by now, the last hour will not come unless the Muslims fight the Jews and kill the Jews. The Jews hide behind a stone or a tree, but the stones and trees talk and say, "Muslim, servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me. Come, kill him." It's hard to get any clearer than that. In commenting on these hadith, longtime Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas affiliate Yusuf al-Qardari says, the hadith says, "O Muslim," not "O Palestinian, Jordanian, Syrian, or Arab nationalist." No, it says, "O Muslim." When we enter a war under the banner of Islam and under the banner of serving Allah, we will be victorious. In the same speech, he also makes clear that this is a cause that brings even Sunni and Shia together, showing the power of Jew hatred in Islam. And as many of you know by now, these same hadith are cited in the 1988 Hamas Covenant. The Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, aspires to the realization of Allah's promise that would be killing all the Jews, no matter how long that should take. And then they cite this famous hadith from Muhammad, noting that it's in both of the most trusted collections. And moving again into the very recent past, on October 19th, the Palestinian Authority released a document calling for the murder of Jews. That's right, the Palestinians are calling Islamic leaders to incite violence and murder on Friday. That's the day when Muslims gather in their mosque, citing the Islamic verse, "O servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." The one-page document published Friday morning by the Palestinian Ministry of Endowments was revealed by the research departments of the Jewish Voice and the Regevi movement. It details a series of instructions and messages intended for Friday sermons, from the Quran to the Hadith and now to Muhammad's biographies. Again, the material is vast, so we'll let the recent chanting of repugnant pro-Hamas protesters decide where we land next. Yes, I'm referring to the chants now heard in many places in the West commemorating Khaybar, one of Muhammad's many violent raids against the Jews. Here it is from Muhammad's biography. Pause the video and read word for word if you like. I will summarize. Muhammad wanted money from a Jewish tribe he conquered. The head of the tribe didn't want to give it to him. Muhammad had him tortured by kindling a fire on his chest until he was almost dead. Then he was beheaded as revenge for the death of one of Muhammad's men who was killed earlier in the raid. Do not miss the fact that Muhammad, the best example for Muslims of all time, tortured a Jewish man with fire until he was almost dead. This is one of the events commemorated by people chanting for Khaybar. Perpetual hatred, violence, torture, and murder are just some of what the Islamic sources inspire against the Jewish people. As I said, we could go on and on with more of the same. So is the problem with Israel the alleged occupation or apartheid, or the fact that lots of Jews in Israel are, still breathing? And what's the solution to this problem? These answers are all in the Islamic texts, which are the ultimate sources of perpetual hatred against the Jews, and they're also the reason that this hatred will continue indefinitely. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.